Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. This video was originally just supposed to be about the new Spellcaster build, but like always I get sidetracked on a tangent about playstyles, activity, and general enjoyment of this game. I've hopefully put some timestamps on the video to make things a little bit more focused. Anywho, I keep thinking that I'm going to make a build that isn't Lernia based, but lo and behold, here we are making another Lernia build once again. But this one is a little different. Instead, I'm targeting a pretty low matchmaking range around rune level 37 with +5 and +2 somber weapons. And the best part about it is that it gets activity all over the first 3 areas of the game. I can get pretty regular invasions in Lernia, Stormveil, Caelid, hell even in the Weeping Peninsula too, all on PC. I even get a few invasions here and there up in the Altus Plateau, but those are a little bit more rare, so I don't check those areas quite as often as maybe I should. The co-op mod killed invasions argument doesn't really hold water to me with this build, because I'm getting a ton of invasions out there in these areas with these levels. Now granted, there are definitely caveats, and I'm still worried about the long-term health of this game, due in large part to a lack of patches and far more inconsistent activity than Dark Souls 3. We played Dark Souls 3 for 6 years, but I guarantee you that there will not be enough activity to sustain 6 years worth of invasions in Elden Ring, unless major issues with activity are addressed by Fromsoft. But I'm sure you guys are a little sick of hearing that at this point, and all we can really do is wait. So I took the advice of invade as you make for this build, and it was surprisingly quite viable the entire time I was putting it together. This build was incredibly fun to put together since you can get a ton of the best sorceries in the game pretty early on if you just know where to look. Roger will also sell you the Ash of War version of Glintstone Pebble, but be careful not to advance this quest too much after defeating Godric. Otherwise, the game will inject a +8 Roger's Rapier into your inventory and ruin your carefully crafted +5 upgrade level build. That does mean that you can't get the Ash of War version of Glintstone Phalanx, which is fine by me. Someone can always drop it for you. I also got fairly lucky along the way and got some pretty great drops fashion-wise. There is exactly one high page in Riot that is fairly difficult to reach, and they dropped their chest piece the very first time I encountered them, and I kind of stuck with that fashion for the rest of the playthrough. Speaking of fashion, I like to do this one thing with a lot of my builds where I have different fashion setups for where they are invading. I did this a fair amount in Dark Souls 3 with my Yuri character, where I would have a specific armor setup for the Grand Archives, and then I would change to a sort of traveling cloak for when I ventured down to Lothar Castle and the Consumed King's Garden. And since this build does quite a bit of traveling when searching for invasions, I have a traveling cloak set up for whenever I venture out to Limgrave or Caelid from Lernia. The lore of this character is that they're supposed to be an eccentric sorcerer knight, largely inspired by witch hunter Jaren. But instead of serving Radahn like Jaren does, eccentric Rennala here serves Rennala's allies at Riot Lucaria, ever loyal to the Carian royal family. So I feel like I've figured out a pretty decent formula for making fun builds in Elden Ring. Step 1, pick a stat that you want to scale with for most of your damage, especially Faith or Int. Then pick a weapon with decent R2s, running attacks or crouching attacks, and then pair all of that with some spells that you might want to use in your offhand. Now this isn't to say just make a Faith build or just make an Int build, but I feel this game plays at its best with hybrid builds. And by hybrid builds, I mean builds that can do a couple of different things. They can cast a few spells, but they can use many different weapons, or they can cast a lot of spells and use only a few weapons. Either way, I feel like the returns, or even just minimal investment in faith and intelligence, can be quite useful in this game, whereas in past games they seem more like wasted points. I know Saint Riot recently made a video where he was using basically a strength build with just enough faith to cast a few incantations like Bestial Sling and Catch Flame, and that was a pretty cool build that works well. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Pure Platinum Prynne, who's made a Geocaster that has ample investment in both faith and intelligence in order to cast all manner of sorceries and incantations that have to do with rocks. But also in combination with that, he uses Horalu's Earthshaker on a weapon. So lots of spells, but a few weapons that all tie together to shake the earth. And all of these builds work and are incredibly creative, and they don't need to necessarily be heavily optimized to work well in invasions. If you wanted to win every single invasion, you'd probably just poise up and use Rivers or Dual Nagis, but where's the fun in that? Why would you do that in a game with as many options for builds as Elden Ring? Unless of course all you care about is winning, and in that case, I'd say just go play a different game with better PvP infrastructure than this one. Sorry for the tangent, now back to this build. What does it do well? What's fun about it? What's he up to, man? What's he doing? What this build likes to do is create a rock and a hard place, and then hit you over the head with the rock and shove you off a cliff into that hard place. That's kind of the core philosophy of a lot of my builds these days in Elden Ring, but it's especially the core philosophy with this character, but now with sorceries. My favorite way to do that is to cast Night Maiden's Mist. Now, people are really stupid when it comes to Night Maiden's Mist because they've probably never seen it before. It's kind of a niche spell and doesn't really stand out as a spell that would be particularly useful against PvE, although you definitely should because it is extremely useful at all levels against PvE. But most people don't know that because it's just a mist. Anywho, so players often just walk right into it, or don't notice that this mist of pain is what's damaging them, so they'll just stand in it and die. But for the absolute ascended geniuses who do realize that I've cast the mustard gas spell, their correct instincts is to run out of the mist. I then like to take a page out of Prynne's spellcasting book again and cast Gravity Well to pull them back into the mist. And the nice thing about the mist is that it has this sort of lingering effect that sticks to whoever it touches for a bit. So your opponent just has to come into contact with it once for it to continue to do damage for a time. Night Maiden's Mist is also really great at separating your opponents from each other. Since the spell can be charged, what you can do is cast it directly at the party near a choke point or an obstacle and see what they do. Often the party will scatter in opposite directions, leaving a cloud of pain in between them that neither really want to cross until the cloud dissipates, giving you a precious 20 to 30 seconds alone with another member of the party, which in this game is more than enough to finish them off. But that's not all I like to do with this rock and a hard place concept. One of my favorites is Gravity Well into the Claymore R2, since a charged Gravity Well cast with a meteorite staff does pretty decent damage, and then pulls your opponent closer to you. So even if your opponent does try to roll out of getting pulled by Gravity Well, they'll still probably get roll caught by the Claymore R2. And then you can do the reverse of this too. I like to throw out Claymore R2s from neutral to try to see how my opponent rolls. If they roll straight back, I throw out another R2, and then follow it up with Carian Piercer, which at this point everyone knows does like a billion damage, but is also just has a fantastic range and knockdown if fully charged. I would also like to shout out Carian Greatsword and its ridiculous range. They basically took Soul Greatsword from Dark Souls 3, but made it actually feasible and useful to use because now you can just cast it multiple times in succession with pretty good speed. I like throwing out the Carian Greatsword as a bait to force my opponent to roll, and then smacking them with the backswing of the second cast. It also covers such a wide area that it's useful for keeping multiple opponents off you at once. Now, if there was such a thing as a dueling meta for rune level 37, this build would definitely hold its own, at least. Well, there sorta is, in a way. I keep getting summoned as a blue to a host who likes to host fight clubs throughout Stormvale. Yeah, not a real dueling range, but I keep getting summoned by this guy, so whatever. But in a duel, there's plenty of spells that simply aren't viable due to longer casting times or the fact that they're strictly area denial. But thanks to invasions, so many of these spells have very practical uses to them. One of my favorites of these spells as of late has been Loretta's Greatbow, which in theory should be useless due to its ridiculous cast time, but is a fantastic sniping weapon for invasions. Personally, this particular invasion was probably one of my favorite invasions of this whole session because it kind of illustrates just why I like them so much more than duels. Here I get to use the environment to get a vantage point on the tower that this duo is hiding out in, and I get to utilize the fact that the Greatbow's shot also explodes upon impact, which can also go through walls and thin floors when you need it to. And now you might be saying, Rofo, this is the second video in a row you've said that you don't really like duels, and I know, I'll shut up about it eventually. I've also been working on using some kinda unconventional and sadly FP intensive ways to make space to use Loretta's Greatbow. I've been using the Ancestral Infant's Head to pour liquid pain on the ground so that people stay away from me while I charge the Greatbow, and then I either manually aim it or release it when they're not expecting it. And lastly, the Greatbow is fantastic for sniping unsuspecting hosts just standing around the bonfire. I lay down a little mustard gas and just start blasting them with long-range glintstone guided missiles. But back to that rock and a hard place spell combo concept, the most effective version of this is Carian Slicer and Glintstone Pebble on the Claymore, which I don't love because it makes this build too damn easy to win invasions with. Glintstone Pebble still does too much damage in this game and is a 2-hit combo, so pairing that with a fast, and high damage close range sorcery like Caria and Slicer means a quick death for most hosts and summons. So I try to keep those a little bit more separate because they're very good on their own and paired with other spells and movesets, and I don't need them paired together and making all of my invasions last 20 seconds. So what I like to do with the Pebble is mix it in with something that looks just like it, Glintstone Pebble the spell. Well, actually it's just Swift Glintstone Shard, which looks like the Pebble but does slightly better damage. But I like to pair Swift Glintstone Shard with the first half of Glintstone Pebble, and basically fire a stream of shards where one of them just does a little damage, and the other can combo into all of the damage. This doesn't always work, but it does provide quite a bit of pressure that can just cause my opponent to back up off a cliff, so that's neat, and I'll take that. Glintstone Pebble can also function as the best turn and burn in the game, mostly because of that 2-hit combo. The ability to suddenly turn around and land a 2-hit true combo from range that will do 75% of someone's health definitely falls into the category of nasty. As for Caria and Slicer, well, it's my go-to chase down, as you've probably already seen thus far in this video. But running Slicer is so obviously what I'm going for all the time, so I like to mix it up in chase down scenarios with running R1s from the Claymore. Because running Caria and Slicer comes out so quickly, and the running R1 from the Claymore is dramatically slower but still has good reach, it tends to land with pretty high frequency and is just a generally good chase down mix-up. So yeah, that's kind of my pitch on this build. Get yourself a weapon that can do decent R2s in your main hand and utilize spells in your offhand. If I had planned out this build just a little bit better, I would probably be running the Meteoric Blade and its phenomenal Ichimonji R2s, but the 18-14 stat split was a little hard for me to swing on this build without giving up some major concessions in intelligence. I could probably make it work with something like Radagon's Scar Seal, but we'll see if I end up doing anything with that. Oh, and to that point with Scar Seals, and I guess Sword Seals as well, I made this build without a Radagon Sword Seal, which is kind of a staple of a lot of my builds so far, because I was convinced that the damage taken increase was the reason I kept getting one-shot by overleveled Phantoms. But I found that this will still happen to you regardless of whether or not you're wearing a Sword Seal. Let's take this instance as an example. I'm wearing gear that has decent magic defense. I'm not wearing a Sword Seal. I just drank a Physic that gives me 10 intelligence, bringing my current total to 37 intelligence at rune level 37, so I should have pretty high innate magic defense. I should be able to survive one hit from Transient Moonlight on the Moonveil, right? Apparently not. Since things like that are going to happen to me anyways, I might as well enjoy the other benefits that a Sword Seal gives me on other builds, as long as I wear some decent armor. And in that same vein, it's been really nice not to have to worry about poise at these lower levels. It's really freed up my fashion choices and expanded my horizons. So hooray for that, I guess. I guess the last note I have that I really wanted to mention about this build is the fact that intelligence builds have all of the consumable projectiles to play with. Seriously. We have all these spells that fire off little pew-pews, but consumables all scale with int. Not all of them, but, you know, a lot of them, and a lot of the really good ones. Wizards have access to and good scaling with Magic Pots, Cuckoo Glintstone, Glintstone Scrap, and Gravity Fans. Now, Cuckoo Glintstone and Glintstone Scrap are kind of just ways to pester people with magic. But the magic pots that you craft with Glintstone Fireflies do pretty absurd damage for minimal FP cost, and Gravity Fans are probably the most useful consumable in the game in my opinion. The fans themselves do pretty good damage, especially with their int scaling, but also cover such a wide area with the fan pattern very quickly. Oh, and they basically stagger anyone you hit them with. I believe you need like face-tanking halberd poise to get through them. So I'm constantly using Gravity Fans on this build. They can do area denial, they can do poised up pressure denial, and you can hold like 20 at a time. You do need to be a very difficult version of Elmer of the Briar to get the bell bearing that sells them, but that's a price I'm very willing to pay to get access to them via the Maiden Husk merchants at the Round Table hold. Now, the very last thing I wanted to talk about in this video is activity, and how to find it, and perhaps even developer intention with finding invasions. Well, that might be a stretch, but bear with me. So my initial theory for why activity in this game is pretty tough is because Fromsoft just took their old DS3 version of invasions, took the solo hosts out of the equation, and slapped it onto an open world game. I still think that's true, but I think there's a little bit more to it than that. I think Fromsoft wants you to actively look for invasions while playing PvE. Don't quote me on this, but I would not be surprised at all to learn that proximity to the party in the open world plays a role in the matchmaking, and that's just my speculation from experience of getting invasions. Now, that would be infuriating because rune level and upgrade level matchmaking are already two pretty limiting factors on matchmaking. But add in proximity and you have a very, very narrow range of people you can invade at any given time in now any given place. But at rune level 37 plus 5, I still get tons of invasions. What I like to do is load into the world, search for an invasion, and if I don't get one immediately, I ride torrent to a particular landmark on the map. Sometimes I ride from Academy Gate Town to the Artist's Shack, or Lascar Ruins to the carriage where you find the Tree Spear, Carrion Manor to the Ravine Veiled Village. And I have yet to make a single one of these trips without getting at least one, but far more often multiple invasions along the way. I just get the sense that Fromsoft doesn't want you just to sit at a bonfire and keep invading from that same bonfire. I think they actively want you to go out into the world and search for those invasions while you play PvE. I think that's a total pain in the ass, and that's something that was already tried and received poorly in Bloodborne, but I do think that's what's happening here. I think there is something special about finding invasions in unexpected places, and having those more fleeting experiences with other parties instead of having invasion after invasion around the bonfire that all just kind of blends together. But I also don't think that's a good thing. Sometimes I just want to sit down and have a string of invasions before I look elsewhere. And I'm also here to tell you that it's still very possible to sit in one spot and get invasion after invasion. You just have to target some pretty specific areas. And invading on the weekends especially never hurts. I've always noticed a huge uptick in activity even back to the days of Dark Souls 3 on weekends, and the reasons for that should be fairly self-explanatory. I think the best place to look for these invasions that come one after another are general area choke points in the world. The game gives you this vast open world to explore where you can go to 3 or 4 different regions from the start of the game, but at the end of the day, you have to go through Lernia at some point, and specifically, you'll be going through Lake-Facing Cliffs and Lascar Ruins, so I spent a lot of time looking for invasions there. It's also why I got so much activity at around rune level 60 with my Nightjar build at the Erdtree Gazing Hill, because it's another funnel for players to go through in order to reach the Altus Plateau. Another one for Caelid would be Rotview Balcony or the Smoldering Wall, since a lot of players pass through there when they're venturing into Caelid. Let's talk about one other thing here too, getting activity as a blue. I've gotten more summons as a blue on this character alone than I probably ever did in 5 years of playing Dark Souls 3, and I really don't think I'm exaggerating here. And while I think a large part of it is that my matchmaking range has a lot of invaders in general, I think it's also because I'm constantly working my way to the top of the queue for blues by roaming the world looking for invasions. I would suspect that the blue summoning system is a queue like it was in Dark Souls 3, and seems to reset every time you move locations and reload the world. And because I'm constantly roaming the world looking for invasions instead of warping from Grace Point to Grace Point looking for invasions, I think I'm getting to the top of that queue far more often than I did in, say, Dark Souls 3 or even Dark Souls 2. This brings me to a general point about blues and Elden Ring that I think a YouTuber and Twitch streamer named GhostGirlBlues highlighted really well, in that they don't really serve much of a purpose in this game. I'll leave a link to GhostGirlBlues' video and Twitch channel in the description or on a card, because I think they're really worth checking out. They seem to really understand the whole roam and search for invasions concept, and have some of the best chill Elden Ring streams out there. But back to the blues. In previous games, the sometimes valiant but typically stupid blue sentinels came to the rescue of hosts who had been invaded by invaders. They provided support to solo and inexperienced players who had no hope of winning a fight against a far more skilled and experienced invader. But in this game, where there are no real solo host invasions, it just feels like you're always the extra push that tips the scales in the host's favor, almost every single time. In all of my experience as a blue, I can count on one hand the number of times I've died to an invader, and that has little to do with any of my skill, and more to do with the fact that I'm frequently the third person in a 3-man chase down of the invader. I still think Felicificity, who I'm sure you all know at this point, made the best case for blues in Elden Ring, but blues without solo hosts are just more advantages for an already advantaged team. And now that basically all of their lore has been stripped away, it makes them feel so bland. That all being said, I do find the occasional fantastic blue summon every now and then. This one that you've been watching was such a blast, because the Invader was lots of fun and was constantly switching up their weapons, and the host didn't seem too experienced with PvP, so it wasn't just a rushdown of the Invader. It's moments like this that make me forget that blues don't really make any sense in this game. Like, if the host summon hadn't been returned to their world for likely some easy anti-cheat related reasons, I doubt this whole fight would have been nearly as fun as a 3v1, especially if they were over leveled. But yeah, this was a really fun fight. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and shout out to the other red Invader. Ultimately, who knows what will be on the horizon for Elden Ring PvP. I think changes are inevitable at some point, but the question for me is how drastic these changes will be and what they will affect. Until then, we have no other options but to either stop playing this game and move on to something else, or learn to adapt to how this particular game functions. I'm not going to tell you what you should choose, or even what the right choice is. If you don't like this game, you don't like this game, and there's not much I can say or do to change your mind. But clearly, I've chosen the latter option of the two, and will continue to press on with it. So that being said, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.